3 years into his tenure, we're in the golden age of Gator basketball. Todd Golden has done it, has taken his team and won on the biggest stage. The Florida Gators are your national champions. We're recapping the action of the national championship game in the rebound.
Florida's title caps off a historic season for the SEC. We're looking back on an incredible year in this conference in our year in review.
That's today. Welcome back to the madness.
Unbelievable Final Four all weekend long, and it's capped off with an amazing national championship game. One for the history books for sure, but it ends with the Florida Gators winning a national championship. Their first without Billy Donovan, and Todd Golden's first in his very young career as a head coach. Let's talk about all this action in the rebound because, Maddie, it wasn't just one shining moment. It wasn't just this miraculous buzzer beater that won. It was one shining contest by Walter Clayton at the end of the game as the Florida Gators pull this bad boy out and win a game that Houston pretty much dominated for the large part until the end, 65-63. Maddie, I mean, we can recap this game and everything first, but go ahead and share your thoughts, and then we'll do a bit of a recap.
For me, the biggest thing on this game amounted to teamwork. I mean, I am kind of glad that I did not get my bet in for Walter Clayton to go off and score 25 plus points and LJ Cryer to surpass 20 points and, hit all the usual stats because this game was about teamwork. You had everybody contributing. May it be 2 points. Everybody on this roster scored tonight, and that's what led them to the championship. So it's good to see a team working together and not just having one or two superstars. It kind of shows you what it takes to get to this level.
They really kept picking each other up, correcting their mistakes, and even when they were in the worst place they possibly could be in a game like this Florida team adjusted and figured themselves out in this game. I want to go through like the key moments and everything else in this game because that's really, what it really amounts to. I mean, at the beginning of this game, it looked a little back and forthish going through, and then Houston starts taking over really midway through the first half in this game. And it's not LJ Cryer having this incredible game or anything else for the most part to start things off. He did have an incredible basketball game to finish the game. But it was kind of like this guy got a point bucket. Juwan Roberts gets a putback. You get a layup here. It's Milos is on. It's this guy. It's one player after another, and someone's finding a way to contribute. Sharp hitting a shot, whatever. It's the whole team getting in on it on the Houston side. And they're, of course, trying to open up Cryer. Houston didn't hit a three, but they were still finding those opportunities in the paint, in the lane, and everything else. And early in that first half, they go on a 10-2 run right there around that midway point from the 15-20 mark to the 10-10 mark. And then they had another run coming out of the second half at the 19-27 to 16-24 mark in the second half. I was 11-2. Those were big signature moments in this game. And that's when it really felt like Houston had a real chance of winning this thing. But it's really that's when Florida's backs were against the wall, where we saw their defense step up and we saw them play with a lot of energy and passion and trying to figure out ways to win. That's when we saw them put more pressure on their defensive end and put pressure on Houston's offense to where it's like, you're not just going to let LJ Cryer shoot us out of this game. You're going to find another way to do this. We're going to force the ball out of your hands. We're going to make you take mid-range shots that you don't necessarily want to take. And then there was the technical fouls also there in the second half that put their backs against the wall. You had the technical foul on, I don't know if it was on Golden or the bench. I kept getting confused because of the way the broadcast is bringing it up. But no one on the court picked up that first technical foul is the biggest point. 2 free throws. Houston gets the ball there. I think it ends up being a 3-point play. And then you have the technical on Ruben Chinyonlu, who were slamming the ball in the court because he's frustrated about a foul call. And that looks like it's going to be a huge moment. But you had the Walter Clayton layup. That was the moment that I really felt that if Florida's going to win this, we need to circle this layup here from Walter Clayton because that's when it was the comeback was completely on. They had came all the way back and they made this 3-point play on the and one from Walter Clayton. And when he hit that scoop shot off the or that layup off the backboard and it goes in, that's the moment it was like, this is it. This is going to be a wild finish in this basketball game. And it really, really was. Look, Florida led for less than a minute in this game, I think was all total. If it was more than a minute, it was by a couple of seconds. So like that was it. Like they led under 2 minutes definitely in this basketball game. It was a game largely dominated by Houston for the most part, but the comeback kids all tournament long just kept being the comeback kids. And you get this moment right here where Kelvin Sampson calls timeout into the game. They're down. They're trying to figure out how they're going to beat Florida in all this chaos and everything else. Kelvin Sampson goes for the win. They put the ball in LJ Cryer's hand, and then they made a pass out to Emmanuel Sharp. And if you freeze frame it right there for a second, right before the next moment that happens, that looks like the mark shot. That looks like the NCAA tournament shot. That looks like this is going to be the final frame and one shining moment when they do the music video tonight. Like it looks like Emmanuel Sharp is about to hit the biggest shot in Houston school history. And it's a contest, not a block, a contest by Walter Clayton that makes him hesitate for one moment with about 2 seconds left on the clock. Sharp goes up, drops the ball because he hesitates on the shot. He can't touch it at that point. If you weren't familiar with basketball rules, maybe you didn't catch that. He could not touch the ball because it would have been a travel at that point. So, and no Cougar can get over there to get the ball. And it's Condon on the floor grabbing it and then, trying to throw it ahead. And that's the basketball game is a master class defensive play that gets the Gators the win against the best defense in college basketball. The Florida has the signature defensive moment, and it's Walter Clayton out there with his hand out. Did not have his biggest game, did not have his 30-point performance that we are accustomed to seeing so far in this tournament in these big moments. And it's just him sticking his hand out, making a shooter adjust his shot just enough to cost them the basketball game. Huge moment, a great defensive play, and that's why coaches always say, "Gotta close out, gotta close out." It's one shining contest by Walter Clayton to get Florida this victory. Maddie, some of your other thoughts in this? I mean, miraculous game because this was the icing on this beautiful Final Four.
Yeah, I mean, excellent, excellent basketball game. Like you mentioned, the defense, absolute phenomenal. This is like my dream basketball game. I love defense. And if you ever ask me in the modern era of basketball, would we have an NCAA championship game where they both shot 25% or less from the 3-point line? I would think somebody was on some heavy drugs, like 100%. Because there's absolutely no way, and you just have to chalk it up to these amazing defensive efforts from both teams. And I think that final play, like you were getting at, was, kind of all encompassing of that because it was just a defensive effort to pull Florida back. You had to go in, get those tough shots. You mentioned the Walter Clayton layup. You had to get in where you fit in. Yeah, you had to get those tough twos because they weren't allowing 3-point shots. You had to make good sets, and these are two teams that have done a phenomenal job at that all season long. So I think this was kind of, the perfect storm of two teams that are very well matched coming together and just giving us the best basketball game that we've seen all season.
I mean, it was a great one, and I'm with you. So, with the defensive note that you put ahead and the defense that Florida played, look, Florida lost the turnover battle in this game, but it was their pressure that got Houston the shorten that margin, really. Like Florida turned over the ball 13 times. Houston turns it over 9 times. And just the way they did this is if you look at the steals in this game, Will Richard had 2 steals, 1 block. Walter Clayton had 1 steal, 1 block. You had the Thomas Hout block. You had 4 steals from Alex Condon, and then 1 block from Ruben Chinyanlu. Like those are the moments right there where you force those turnovers. You got the stop, and those kind of signature moments, and that shortened that gap between these teams. I really felt like, and that's when you were able to get out in transition. That's when you started causing offensive problems on Houston because Houston really have Florida shake it in their knees a little bit if this was a boxing match because it was like it was punch, 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 ready to knock you out. Florida's got a couple of haymakers that got stored up right here in this situation to punch back, and that's really what it came down to: the defensive end pushing Florida through to the finish line. Then we were talking about Walter Clayton not having his best night. He comes away with 11 points and 5 rebounds. It's not this miraculous 30-point, 20-point performance that we've, it was hyped up to be. He struggled. He struggled a lot, but guys stepped up in his place in that team basketball concept you were talking about. You look at Will Richard in this game. Yeah, sure, he goes -3, but he made impacts and he was dragging Florida along with him to make sure while they were struggling, while some of their stars weren't having their best moments, he was giving his contribution. He played 32 minutes in this game, 18 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, and he was 50% from the floor and knocked down 4 threes. He was over 50% from three tonight. And he got those feet set, had his moment. He was unafraid of a big time basketball game. Gotta love what you saw from Will Richard because out of their guards, like Will Richard's good, but he's not the consistent shooter. He was tonight. He was the hot hand. He was the guy who pulled them through. And then you also talk about, Alex Condon coming through in key moments as well. He had some fouls that cost him at moments, but he also had some really good defensive plays and some really big rebounds in a tough matchup with Jawan Roberts in this game. And Manny, I think that would lead you to your biggest point because you were talking about how the depth would play a factor in this game from Florida's front court depth. And I think we saw some of that when Houston started getting their front court in foul trouble.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was one of the biggest things. I mean, free throws played a lot of this. Let me just add one for old time's sake. The Cougars missed 5 free throws. They lost by 2. You make free throws, you win a national championship. But
Probably.
anyways, on that other note, yeah, we did see Tugler getting some foul trouble. He was out in the what was it about the 2-minute mark. He committed his last foul that took him out of the game. That could have changed a lot for Houston. So when you look at that, they were kind of interchanging him and Francis. Francis had 4 fouls. They had to play soft in the last few minutes of the game, whereas you look over Florida's personal foul line, they had a couple fouls left to give.
They didn't
And
only have to play
until
soft. They had to
yeah,
play small. They had to play
yeah,
small. That was the other takeaway I saw because, like, and Florida had front court piece after front court piece. It didn't matter the fouls. Like, of course, the fouls matter, but like, it didn't matter the number of fouls the front court was committing because you had another guy to go to. That was really what I was seeing out there because Houston went super small at one point because they didn't have Tugler. They didn't have their other forwards. They didn't, Roberts had to sit for a minute and get a rest. Like there was those kind of issues in this game where like Houston's got to go small. And that's also the moment they started struggling scoring. And Florida's out there running Chinyanlu and Hauk or Chinyanlu and, had Handlogden out there. They had every combination still available on their bench of here's our front court. We may not be the most talented front court in the SEC, but we're talented enough and we got a ton of dudes. So enjoy playing against these huge bodies with your guards trying to get those easy at the rim twos because it's not happening. And that's really what set Florida up on that extended 20-point run they were on in that comeback.
yeah, I think it made a major difference. Like we've talked about all season long, Florida's depth just gave them another step up versus the competition, and it definitely made an impact here in this one.
It certainly did. So just some highlights here on what this championship is. Florida was back-to-back national champions under Billy Donovan. We talked about all the omens pointing to like maybe the stars are aligning here for Florida. The way they won this game, I'm not arguing against the Cosmos right now. But this is their first one without Billy Donovan. And Billy Donovan, we were talking about, is a significant, like Duke and Coach K, Billy Donovan is a significant piece or a piece of the history for Florida. Their best moments have always come under Billy Donovan. But now you have a 30-something-year-old coach who is at the very beginning of his career, a young coach who's got a bright future in front of him, sitting right now as the coach there in Florida. And I mean, it's an exciting era for Todd Golden. And this is the coach coming into this tournament who was who had not won his first game in the NCAA tournament. Maddie, your thoughts on what the beginning now here, or this the biggest moment in Todd Golden's career? What do you expect out of the future now for Todd Golden?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we're entering the golden age in Gator basketball because you have so much future left ahead, so many recruiting opportunities, winning a national championship. I'm sure NIL is going to be pouring in the swamp down there. So they're going to get good pieces. And when you've got a coach who can, come up 3 years into a program and get a natty, I mean, I feel like there is a long road ahead of great basketball for the Florida Gators.
It certainly does feel like this is a moment right here that Florida's got a very bright future ahead of them, and like maybe the celebration doesn't stop. I'm not saying they're going to go back to back like they did under Billy Donovan and Dan Hurt. Like, look, folks, that doesn't come around too often, but Florida looks like right now coming into next year, they're still going to be a good basketball team as they start their transfer portal journey here for the rest of the year. They got a bright future ahead of them. Let's see what happens going forward. But the golden era might just be getting started in Gainesville right now. So historic moment for this Florida Gator program, and a huge win over one of the best programs to probably have never won it. And yeah, poor Houston fans. That's all I got to say for them. Like, they got to wait again. Still, I don't know what to say to them at this point because Phi Slamma Jamma and the Kelvin Sampson years have still not delivered for them. And ironically, you look for ties in basketball games, and those ties in history. Jimmy Valvano. Todd Golden is the youngest coach since Jimmy V to win a national championship. Who did Jimmy V beat in the national championship? Phi Slamma Jamma. You just look for these moments. You just look for these incredible moments and little pieces, little flavor in the story there. Just another shining moment right there in the storyline. But congratulations to the Florida Gators. Massive year. It was a win that capped off a historic season in the SEC. And Maddie, that's where I want to go next as we look back on what was an incredible year of basketball, and one that we talked about several times this year, all the way back in November and October. Like, get ready because this is going to be a special year in the SEC. Maybe we didn't anticipate this being the greatest conference of all time, but it was truly historic. Share your thoughts there before I do the deep dive on this year review, because we got to look at these resumes and the storylines that came out of this year.
I mean, I think we need to roll in the clip from one of our first episodes where I said this may be the greatest conference in basketball, and you just acted like it was blasphemy, David.
Did not act like it was blasphemy. I was just sitting there a little perplexed that it's like you're going to claim pure history and what I think we are the best conference in America. I did not know we were going to be historically the greatest conference to ever play college basketball in the history of college basketball. I thought there was a chance we'd beat the Big East record for most teams in the NCAA tournament. I didn't think we were going to shatter it.
I mean, yeah, like you said, absolutely phenomenal year for the SEC. We've kind of been anticipating it over the last few years, getting elite coaches in programs, spending a little bit more money on basketball, whereas, the SEC is usually seen as a football conference. But with the slow growth, I think this year is just the year it finally exploded because you've had that little 10% here, 10% there, and now that 10%'s added up to be so much better than anybody anticipated.
Yeah, and I think it goes down to you talk about mentioned football, this being a football conference. The money from football and the resources from football have allowed a lot of this to happen. It's not just NIL. Everyone wants to talk about NIL because it is the big talking point, but the investment this conference has made, and it's like, okay, our big money raising sport is football, but football only happens from, late August to January. What are people going to be watching from, the end of football season, December when their bowl game's over with, to all the way to March and April? Then going into college baseball before we get to next football season. We have to invest in something. That was always the thought process in the SEC. And they said basketball. We need to invest in basketball. And that's where we're here. And that's why I'm about to read off the accomplishments this conference has made. Folks, I really want people to appreciate what this year was. And so these are the notable highlights on the SEC's resume that they collected this season alone. This conference was 88.9% win percentage in non-conference played this season. They had a 22 or 29 and 19 record in non-conference Q1 games. They were 14 and 2 in the ACC SEC Challenge. The ACC in the Big East, by the way, the Big East was incredible in the 80s and in the 2000s. The ACC great in the 90s and 2000s. Really is their kind of storylines, and with trading back and forth from the 80s and they just whooped the crud this season back in December of one of the greatest conferences in this sport, 14-2. This conference won 5 MTE championships back in Feast Week. They had 14 NCAA tournament bids. You know who your team is. That is 14 out of 16 teams making the tournament. There was a record number of Sweet 16 teams who made the Sweet 16 this year, taking the record away from the ACC. The SEC tied the Big East record of the most teams in the Elite Eight. They had two Final Four teams, and then Florida caps it all off with a national championship. You keep going down the list. 184-24 non-conference record, 58-20 versus the rest of the Power Five conferences in basketball. You had 7 AP final top 25 teams, a plus 2207 KenPom rating, which is historically high. 8 top 25 KenPom teams, 14 top 50 KenPom teams, and every team in the SEC was in the KenPom top 100, and 2 top 10 KenPom teams all time in the history of the KenPom computer system that goes back to 1997. So one of the best teams two of these teams were the best we have seen since 1997. That's historic marks. You had 3 AP first team All Americans. You had the AP Coach of the Year, the Sporting News Player of the Year in Janai Broom. You had 5 Kyle Macy Award finalists. You had the Nolan Richardson Award winner, the Jimmy Fallon National Coach of the Year for Chris Beard, the Skip Prosser Man of the Year, and 4 Riley Wallace Award finalists. Like, do I need to go on what this year was? Do I really need to go on? That's just the resume. If you walk into any job in America and translate that into your job, just go ahead and it's like, I am the master of data processing, whatever your 9 to 5 job is. This dude just walked in was saying that he worked for every Fortune 500 company in America doing your job better than you. Like, this guy wins the argument. Like, that's what the SEC was this year. This is the single greatest season a conference has ever had.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it throughout the year. You saw a lot of naysayers as we got into the tournament saying the SEC was going to get blown out. I think that was probably the highlight of my year was just the SEC absolutely continuing to dominate in the tournament because they were like, "Oh, all they did was play each other." Yeah, and we made it through. I feel like that should be like a big reward on its own. Like, congratulations, you survived the SEC this season. You get a medal.
Yeah, you get an award for if you coached your team to a semi-successful season this year. You did a good job. Like, yeah, that's really what it was. But yeah, there were some remarkable jobs done. You want to talk about history though, and we can start off here with the Florida Gators. We obviously have had a chance to talk about them and their year that they've had. Let's go ahead and let's talk about some of these historically great teams that we've had this year. 36-4. This team finishes third in KenPom, of course, national champions, which is why we're having this show tonight. SEC tournament champions, and they were a 1 seed in the West region this year. Maddie, look back on Florida here a little bit. Historically great team. This is one of the this is one of the two teams that have entered in the top 10 of KenPom all time. Your thoughts, final thoughts on Florida's incredible season.
Yeah, I mean, think we go back to November where we talked about, Florida's going to be a good basketball team, but we don't think they're going to be the best. And it was like almost at that point we saw them slowly progress and get better and better. And by the end of not even the end of conference play, probably mid-conference play, they were in discussion for being one of the top basketball teams. And they were able to carry it out through the rest of the season. So I feel like, we kind of had that starting point of they're going to be good. We don't know if they're going to be national championship level. And as they continue to progress, I feel like that just shows you what kind of a coach Todd Golden is, what kind of team he had built this program around, um, that continued to get better and continue to play as a team like we saw tonight. And that in my opinion is what makes a national championship. So I think they had a great progression through the year. I don't want to say most improved team because they were already great, but it was just like we said, the SEC was so good this year, you almost picked a front runner and didn't want to knock them down until you had to, and Florida made us.
Well, I mean, look back at some of the moments that like gave reasonable doubt to Florida. Like, they had out of the undefeated teams that came out of non-conference, they played probably one of the weaker non-conference schedules. They had some good wins, but they took that loss immediately to Kentucky and Rupp, which their defense allowed 106 points. So there was some doubting in their defense, and they had to play better defense. We thought it was a good defensive team, but like here's Kentucky putting up 106 on them. They had that loss to Missouri, a team at home that was kind of they got hit in the face and you were like, wow, that's just, crazy. And then Tennessee in back in Knoxville at one point, I mean, smoked this Florida team 64-44. And then you had the loss to Georgia late in the year as well. But from that Georgia loss, this Florida team never lost a game again. When the calendar turned to March, they've been undefeated since March 1st. And they're going to be carrying that over into next season. The win in the SEC tournament, like it's the first time since a team in the SEC did not get knocked out by a lower seed in the NCAA tournament after being the SEC tournament champion since Auburn won the Final Four or went to the Final Four back in 2019. They got extremely hot, and this team kept coming back and coming back. And I think being down and being hit in the mouth so many times this season made them so incredibly strong. Another team that we need to talk about in the historic season they had. This is Auburn's second time making the Final Four in school history. They were SEC champions. They were the number one overall seed in this year's NCAA tournament. They finished fourth in KenPom, and 32-6 record all time. Maddie, we talked about like what, a little bit about Auburn, but like I think we need to all appreciate what Auburn was this season. This was the most dominant team from November to February this season in college basketball, and they had some huge wins against Houston. They had huge wins against North Carolina, Memphis, and then Purdue, and then it opened up conference play extremely strong with a 9-0 start. So, I mean, Maddie, just kind of looking back on Auburn, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously talked about Auburn a lot this season. Have some unbelievable players who, unfortunately, we won't see again play college basketball. But it was the year of Janai Broom, and he led his team to some great wins. He was a standard in college basketball, National Player of the Year, but he had a lot of good pieces around him, and not one man can do it all. So we saw great performances from freshmen like Todd Pettifer to Chad Baker Mazzara, who is, kind of the Robin to Janai's Batman. And Bruce Pearl. Excellent coaching season for him. And, I don't have any doubts that he's gonna rebuild and try and continue this great era of basketball for Auburn.
And they're definitely a team that if they have a successful transfer portal class, like they can be a very good team again. But Bruce Pearl's accomplishments across two teams in the SEC now have been phenomenal. Bruce Pearl takes probably the spot now as the greatest coach, undoubtedly, in Auburn basketball history after this season to this point. So huge moments for him, his program. It's just the last game. That's the only thing that leaves a sour taste in your mouth. They're probably, this is a historically great team when it comes to college basketball here in the modern era. And unfortunately, I know it's a sour note, but it's also a note to take as well. This is probably up there with like the Duke team that didn't win the national championship years ago as one of the best teams to not win a national championship. Incredible basketball team with so much talent and rising stars and sporting news player of the year in Janai Broom, and the year that he had will be forever remembered. I think this is going to be like Janai Broom's final campaign was his best at Auburn, and I think that's he's going to go down as prop. Charles Barkley said it tonight on the broadcast for the national championship, best player in Auburn history. I think Charles Barkley, may have a may have he had the smallest of pride to say that, I think, as probably Auburn's best player all time, so but Janai Broom, terrific season and everything else, like the accomplishments he had on the way. This was a historically great Auburn team. But Maddie, it wasn't just the big guys who had these signature moments. You talk about Chris Beard and what he did for Ole Miss this season. Look, it's nothing like Auburn and Florida, but they went 24-12. They finished top 25 in KenPom. They got their school's second Sweet 16 in school history, and they were a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, a team that's expected to win in the first round. And they had a lot of good moments, Maddie. It's not the big celebration, but this was a historically great Ole Miss team for this school.
Yeah, I think, it's like we talked about earlier. This conference continues to get better and better each season, even if it's just a little bit. And Ole Miss is one of those teams to talk about. They brought in Chris Beard. They had, a good season last year in non-conference and kind of had to play around the SEC waters to figure it out. But this season they got the gist of it. And, Chris Beard, I think with a couple more years, some good recruiting under his belt. And Ole Miss may be one of those teams we're talking about, like we talked about Auburn and Florida.
Maybe that would be wild when you consider the history at Ole Miss compared to so many other teams in the SEC. But Chris Beard has made basketball matter in Oxford, and he's made it a big time sport there. Like I said, this is going to go down as one of the best Ole Miss teams all time. They had a good year. They had a winning conference record, 10-8. That hadn't happened very often in Ole Miss. And great season, great players that they'll remember for a long time, like Sean Padula and Matthew Morrell, and how long he stuck around for that Ole Miss program, from going from the Kermit Davis years to the Chris Beard years, and probably going to be one of the players that are remembered here in this transition period of where Ole Miss basketball is right now in this moment. Yeah, it was year two for Chris Beard, and it's a remarkable year for Chris Beard and Ole Miss. But you go back, it was year two for him. We had three first year coaches who all made the tournament this year, and two of them made the Sweet 16. Maddie, let's walk through some of these first year coaches because it was new chapters for three schools, and all their coaches had success at one way or the other. Let's start with my alma mater and our favorite team, the Arkansas Razorbacks, and John Calipari's first year with Arkansas. Maddie, this was a year that had, I mean, just about everything, the highs, the lows, the uncertainty, everything that you wanted to talk about with this Arkansas team. But you look back at that 0-5 start in SEC play, the worst start to conference play in school history. And you probably thought to yourself this first year for John Calipari was going to be a disaster, but they miraculously turned this thing around and ended up in a Sweet 16. Maddie, your thoughts on Arkansas's first year under Coach Cal?
Yeah, I mean, I it was a crazy, crazy year to think that, Cal came in, there was one player on the team who ended up being hurt, didn't touch the floor the entire season, and Lawson Blake. So not even a major contributor. While we love Lawson and he's a great dude, not somebody you're gonna build a team around. So you go from basically no roster at all to piecing together a super high expectation team to doing well in non-conference, 0-5 in conference play, and we're like, what in the world is going on? But Cal said it himself. They put him in the coffin, but forgot the nails. And they came out and proved that they were still alive. And kind of like Florida progressed throughout the season, maybe not as much progression as we'd like to see, or not as quickly. Um, but he was able to turn this team around, prove that he's still Hall of Fame coach quality, unlike, some other fans from another program kept telling us after we got Cal. Um, but I think that was one of the big things is he was determined to prove them wrong, and his team was there behind him, and they pushed their way through and made this a phenomenal season for year one in Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, it is a signature in a way. Like I say, I don't know if it's John Calipari's best coaching job, and I don't know if it's John Calipari's, should be coach of the year or whatever. I don't think that's the case at all. But this was a great coaching job to keep everyone on board the ship, not let go of the rope. And because you easily could have folded the season after the LSU loss back on January 14th. Instead, on February 1st, in your trip to Rupp, is the moment that you turn your entire season around and this team gets red hot going in as soon as the calendar turned to February. Just everything started perking up for this team. And you want to talk about the run in the NCAA tournament. It was Hall of Fame corner that he overcomes. It was against Kansas and Bill Self and all the historic battles between John Calipari and Bill Self in this sport. You talk about Rick Pitino, a coach that he coached against several times when Rick Pitino was at Louisville, while John Calipari is at Kentucky. That's the moment that he gets back to his first Sweet 16 since before COVID, before the pandemic. And John Calipari's back in the Sweet 16. It's an emotional moment for him. It's a great moment for Arkansas's program, which, a year ago at this time, we were just pleading, please get us back to the Sweet 16 as Razorback fans, I felt like. But here's Arkansas for the last five Sweet 16s now across two coaches in their basketball program. Yeah, they aims higher, but, it always was in Arkansas, and we talked about it a year ago, and you can go check our tape from this episode 1 year ago. John Calipari becoming the new coach at Arkansas, the floor was always you wanted the floor to be the Mike Anderson years. And somehow he found a way just to be a little bit better than the floor in year one. And you're hoping that the trajectory moves forward and that this was the worst year, which turned out to still be a great season in so many ways for Arkansas fans when it came to March. And that was one of the big moments. He had five top 25 KenPom wins to rack it up. So some huge victories along the way, not just in the NCAA tournament. But we talk about, the win in Rupp for Arkansas. But let's go to Rupp because Mark Pope had a phenomenal first year. And you might remember back last March, Maddie, I talked about like how much I like BYU and Mark Pope's offense. Comes to the SEC, comes to his alma mater, goes 24-12, finishes as the number 16 team in KenPom, takes Kentucky to a Sweet 16, something they hadn't done in a long time, and ends up as a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament and five top 10 KenPom wins on the year for Mark Pope. Your thoughts on Mark Pope's first season and in Lexington?
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of those years of kind of ups and downs, like you talked about Arkansas, not quite as low of the lows that we saw there, but I feel like Mark Pope did a fantastic job. I think a lot of people were concerned about him coming into Kentucky, his tenure not being as big and bolsterous as they're used to in a coach, but he came in, got a team that fit his system, and played it phenomenal. Had some major wins over this year, and like I said, got them back to the Sweet 16, and I think that's what everybody in Kentucky has been waiting on.
They really were. And that was a big moment with that win against Illinois to get them there. But, you had something special along the way, every step in the way. You talk about this Kentucky team and you go back to the Champions Classic and they beat Duke in early November. And there's nothing but good feelings all of a sudden. You beat rival Louisville. You had the comeback win against Gonzaga in the non-conference, and you start SEC play beating the national champion this year, the Florida Gators, on your home court. You had wins against Texas A&M at home. You've swept Tennessee on the year, and you ended up going to that Sweet 16 with wins over Troy and Illinois. And on the season, I said they swept Tennessee. Unfortunately, they lost to them in the Sweet 16, but on the regular season, they swept them in the SEC games. This team finishes 10-8 in the SEC. They have a great year. They get some key wins along the way, and it was a year that you could see the vision. You could really see the vision of what Mark Pope wants to build in Kentucky. And this transfer portal cycle is going to be interesting to see what kind of team he's able to put together in the future. He's going to be fun to cover this offseason to kind of see what direction Kentucky's going to go in building here for the future, because they have a very high ceiling under Mark Pope if he continues his success there in Lexington. But I don't think Kentucky fans could have asked for a better start to the season. I'm not going to tell Kentucky fans how to feel, but I imagine they're feeling pretty good after their first year. Any other thoughts on this first season for Kentucky? Because you're going to remember players like Otego Way. You're going to remember players like, Amari Williams and Jackson Robinson and the great year that they had there in Lexington, Lamont Butler as well.
Yeah, I'm interested to see kind of how some of those players, um, that are brought in fit into his system, because I feel like he, like I said, got a very good team surrounding him that fits the system that he likes to run. So I'm interested to see, kind of who's next for Mark Pope.
Yep. Okay. See if he can keep it going year to year. I imagine he can. There's a lot of shooters out there that he can build a really good team again. But the unsung coach, I really feel like, always comes from the program that doesn't get all the attention, and that's Vanderbilt, Maddie. And Mark Byington had arguably one of the best years in Vanderbilt in recent history for this team. In his first year, this team wins 20 games, goes 20-13 in his first season. They make their first NCAA tournament appearance since 2017. They come across as a 10 seed, and they have four top 25 Ken Pom wins for this Vanderbilt team. Maddie, I love the Bart Byington story this year and what everything that he got happened there at Vanderbilt in Nashville. Your thoughts on what was an awesome year, outside of about the way that it finished?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing we talked about the other first year coaches at programs like Arkansas and Kentucky who have been historically huge basketball programs with huge fan bases already. You go into a school like Vanderbilt that doesn't really have many expectations for their basketball program. And by the end of the conference season, you see Memorial absolutely alive. So, I mean, I fully believe that Byington brought basketball back to Vanderbilt, brought it back to their fans, and made them excited about it again. So I think that's the biggest accomplishment for Vanderbilt. We saw a little bit of it, at the end of the run of Stack when he started winning some basketball games, Memorial kind of coming alive. But this season, I feel like Memorial Magic was true Memorial Magic because you had a solid fan base there. While yes, he had excellent season in terms of numbers, but I think the real win here is the fact that he's bringing fans back to Vanderbilt basketball.
Yeah, it was a big year. I mean, they stormed the court how many times this year? Students were out there going crazy. Memorial Gymnasium was certainly alive. Yeah, Jerry Stackhouse's best year was a run in the NIT in the year that they barely missed out on the NCAA tournament. Some bad losses, really was the downfall of the Jerry Stackhouse era, but very successful non-conference for Mark Byington, and people take notice of that undefeated, that one loss non-conference run, and that being a championship game in their MTE to Drake, who also made the tournament and was a really good basketball team, really good team, and they didn't lose another game until they got into SEC play. Vanderbilt, went through ups and downs, but they came up with these magic moments like when they beat Tennessee at home, they beat Kentucky, they had the win against Texas, the win against Missouri and Texas A&M on the road. Like those were big moments for Vanderbilt basketball. And they've got a bright future and one that they can continue to grow this program under a coach who, is putting in all the work and finding players and, putting together a really good team with what he has in this program. And I think it's encouraging when you find a mid-major coach with all this talent and brings the program to this level. Certainly, you put Vanderbilt in the ACC, they might come away with as the number 3 team in the ACC this year, or the number 2. Who knows how they finish in the ACC? Like they weren't surrounded by what this conference was this year. Mark Byington was extremely successful this year, and all credit to him because you're right. Vanderbilt basketball came back to life just a little bit. Vanderbilt basketball is not Vanderbilt football. It's a much prouder program than that.
Yeah.
It's got a much more tenured history than that, and he brought some of that pride back to that program and made Memorial alive this season. But Maddie, I want to ask you, is there a new horizon on the? Actually, let's go here first before we talk about that. What was your favorite moment this season in SEC basketball?
My favorite moment this season, SEC basketball. Man, there's so many good ones.
So many good ones.
Um,
Well, while we
you,
wait
you
on you, I'll
you
tell
give me yours,
Okay,
and
I'll
I'll
tell
think.
I'll tell you mine. And I'm gonna go with a non-Arkansas moment just, to make sure that we go with something different here. I would say the Alabama game in Neville Arena in overtime where Mark Sears hits one of the biggest shots in Alabama's season this year, going there in that overtime game. They already lost in Coleman earlier, they had that loss in Coleman earlier this year and lost on their home floor, and then they tag Auburn back in that overtime game. And it's a huge moment for Alabama fans and what this rivalry is. And if it's the walk-off moment for a regular season game for Mark Sears, like that's going to be one of the biggest. That's going to be one of the big moments in Alabama basketball history, and a shot like that, and it goes down as one of the best players in Alabama basketball history and one that's going to be remembered. So I think that was one of my favorite moments this season, was watching that basketball game, which was a phenomenal basketball game and probably one of the best of the year. And then Mark Sears knocking down that late shot to walk it off in Neville Arena when Auburn fans really thought they were going to walk out with a win in their home gym after, the game going to overtime.
Okay, going back. Now that you said Alabama, I'm recircling. But I'm gonna go with Tennessee's win over Alabama, the comeback to win at home when they were kind of starting to head down that dark path, and they were able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. See Zakai Ziegler really being, the leader that he is, and Chaz Lanier finally getting into the swing of things, getting some points on the board. I think that game was one of the biggest for me of the season. Just another one to show how dominant the SEC was this year.
And well, you're forgetting the magic moment in that game. Meshack hitting the walk-off three.
True.
Like, you think about the shooters on Tennessee, Zakai Ziegler, Jordan Gainey, Chaz Lanier. It's Meshack who hits that shot. That magic moment right there.
Yeah. Great. Like I said, great game. Shows how good and how well versed the SEC is. You've got players that can come out of nowhere and completely change the trajectory of a game or, possibly a season. I
Yep,
don't think Meshack changed the trajectory of Tennessee season, but, you know, who knows what would have happened if they lost that game.
well, you also just think about some of the other great moments, like Cal's return to Rupp, and he gets the huge win. And that one, you also have the comeback victory and the win against Duke for Kentucky fans, and that one where Cooper Flagg fumbles the ball late in the game, and Kentucky comes away with a big win against another blue blood program in the Champions Classic, and then Mark Pope going to a 1-3-1 defense against Gonzaga earlier in the year. That was big. And then you talk about other moments, Mike White getting his first win against Florida, his old program earlier in the year, and Georgia getting back to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years, ending the SEC's longest drought from the NCAA tournament. You also think about Arkansas sweeping Texas on the year, and the return of that rivalry in this conference. Big moment there for Arkansas fans and people who grew up with the Southwest Conference games and everything else. Those were big moments, and I'm sure every fan out there has one that they definitely would love to share on what the season is, because they have a moment that they remember. Also, you think about Arkansas or John Calipari beating Rick Pitino and Bill Self. Like those games in the NCAA tournament are probably going to be iconic in Arkansas season as well. But like I said, you can go down the list. Vanderbilt storming the court how many times? Like those things like that. It was a great year all around. And here we are closing this chapter. Todd Golden wins a national championship. Maddie, is there a new era on the horizon in SEC basketball?
I don't know if it's a new era. I think maybe from this season on, it's a continuing era. We've seen it slow, like I said, slowly build. And I feel like it's one of those you're just stacking the levels on the skyscraper, and we're going to see how tall it goes.
I feel like Auburn and Alabama have been the big talking points in SEC basketball over the last couple of years, probably since 2019. Those two programs have been at the top, and then you had Tennessee mixed in, and Kentucky had a couple of good teams, but were disappointments in March. But here we are in the beginning of the Todd Golden era. Florida's back at the top of SEC basketball for the moment, and with the biggest win of the year. And you got a young coach with a bright future and very promising talent here. There's tons of coaching talent, but you also got some older coaching talent that may be moving to the side. You don't know later down the line as well. And, you're talking about coaches that are going to have to rebuild teams that have been vastly dominant. Like, I think Alabama, Florida are going to be two of the teams that we're going to be talking a lot about next year. We're going to see the portal still yet to come, but when you look at the retentions of those programs, those look like the two of the most interesting ones right now. While Rick Barnes and Bruce Pearl have a lot of work to do to get their programs back to the levels they're going to be at. So maybe it's a different chapter moving into this conference next season. I think this conference is going to look very different next year, but we got the whole portal to go. And there's so many names that we're going to remember. And we still got the NBA draft to talk about to cap off this historic season, the SEC with Boogie Flan, Trey Johnson, and Walter Clayton, all these great talents out there that are going to be headed to the league. Janai Broom, NBA futures ahead for so many players in the SEC. So when we get around to talking that NBA draft coverage as well, we'll talk about some of that and we'll have a better picture on what the how the story is going to start unfolding next year. But it's an interesting story, definitely a new chapter in this conference.
Yep. And new coaches.
New coaches, new coaches, Sean Miller and Bucky McMillan. Got to talk about them. We'll be talking about them so much in the upcoming episodes. We are starting now. Starting now. In the next episode, we'll be talking about transfer portal. We'll be talking about the coaching changes. We'll be talking about everything that's going on here in the off season to kick off the fourth season of the Hoop Southbound show. Third full one on YouTube at this point. But guys, this is the end of season 3 for this show. You guys have helped us grow this channel so much. This channel doubled in size this season, just in the basketball season alone. So there, that didn't include the numbers that how many of y'all subscribed over the off season, and added, started following us and started looking at things. This channel grew so much this year, and I can't thank you guys enough. And I'm glad that you guys have liked the content, enjoyed listening to us ramble about basketball throughout the year. And we've had our disagreements, we've had our agreements, and everything else. Comment section. But it's been fun, and we've got a whole year ahead and a whole off season to start speculating, guessing, thinking about the future and everything else. But thank you guys for being here for along the ride, because I appreciate you guys subscribing. And I can't wait to start the next chapter of this show as we move into another season and another off season. Maddie, anything you want to say?
Yep. Thanks, guys, for coming along the ride with us. I know we may not be the top of the top cream of the crop basketball analysts, but we like it. We have fun. We hope you guys have fun listening to us, and we can't wait to bring you more content.
If you're new here and you want to join us for next year's ride, please like and subscribe. I won't go too far into it, but we'll see you guys next season. We would love to have you guys here. So please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, guys.